Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 26th of April 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Well, this is tough stuff, Mike, I think.
Yes. Well, look, I saw this tweet being pushed out by PETA this morning saying animals are not ours to experiment on. And it reminded me of an article on 21st Century Wire a couple of weeks ago that we didn't mention. I thought we would bring it on at this point. It's this one by Diliana Gunyera, revealed Pentagon's $70 million chemical and biological program at Porton Down in the UK. What Diliana is saying is the Pentagon has spent at least £70 million on military experiments involving tests with deadly viruses and chemical agents at Porton Down, the UK laboratory near the city of Salisbury. The article says information obtained from the US Federal Contracts Registry reveals that the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency has funded a number of military projects performed at the UK Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down over the last decade. Among them, experimental respiratory infection of non-human primates with anthrax, Ebola virus, Marburg virus, Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus, Western equine encephalitis virus, and Eastern equine encephalitis virus, and so it goes on. Right now, it says the U.S. Defense Threat Reduction Agency has also funded experiments on animals which were exposed to chemical agents such as sulfur, mustard gas, and phosgene gas, and so on. So that's what we see on screen is one of the contracts that was awarded. And of course, this is coming from the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, Brian, and that you would assume, would you not, means that they're looking at ways to protect soldiers and others from chemical and biological attack. But then later on in the article, she points out a contract which resulted in 12 marmoset monkeys being experimentally infected with the Ebola virus via aerosol at Porton Down under a Pentagon-funded project. Now, the question is, does this imply that they're in fact developing delivery mechanisms, or is this that they're testing the effects of something on the basis of how it's delivered? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm certainly asking the questions about the use of animals. And I mean, the scale of this is something in the region of 150,000 animals in the last several years. So it's not insignificant, and I'm just interested to know. It's perhaps something we need to look a bit more seriously at. Now, why am I mentioning this today? Well, because Diliana will be on live at 7:30 this evening on Humanity versus Insanity. Ian Crane back in the studio. And so perhaps he will be asking that question. And I do recommend people listen to that or watch that particular interview.
It's pretty horrific stuff, though, Mike. I can say that many years ago, they were certainly using goats as a live animal for nerve agent experiments, and goats appeared in a training video to show you the effects. This is what makes Salisbury and Skripal case such nonsense. One of the things that makes it such nonsense. But that volume of animals, and of course no transparency, so the British public has no idea whether this is actually a protective program to protect us against viruses, and some pretty remote viruses at that, or whether this is in fact a weapons program being simply transported overseas by the Americans, which is a pretty common game.
And it's an important question to ask, bearing in mind the stance that the UK is taking at the moment on non-proliferation of these weapons, and particularly their attacks on Russia. So I think we should keep on that one.
Yeah. Excuse me. Let's come on to the subject of UK's death pathway, and some people are going to be a little bit, I think, upset by this as a title. But in the background, over several years now, the UK column has been receiving more and more information saying that something very serious, something dark was going on within the NHS. We've taken these reports very seriously. We've dealt with them very carefully. But as time's gone on, it's true to say that the evidence is building that there is something extremely unpleasant going on. Now we're going to come back to this case of young Alfie because a great many people have contacted us and asked us to pay attention to what's happening in this particular case. And so, as Mike set out yesterday, this little boy became ill, and we've now got to the stage where courts are simply saying that no, he must be allowed to die, even though medical facilities and doctors overseas, Italy in particular, are saying we can take this child. So what does the court do? It rules that the little boy is a British citizen. He's now under the control of the court, and therefore he's going to be allowed to die under the control of the court. So it would seem at first glance that the actual policy being implemented by the court here is a care policy by a pathway to death. So let's just have a look at the timeline. We've chosen the Daily Mail because they were kind enough to give a very concise report here. So we can see, first of all, that in May 2016, Alfie is born apparently perfectly healthy, but he misses what they say are numerous development milestones in his first 7 months. And by December 2016, Alfie's caught a chest infection. He's having seizures. He's taken to Alder Children's Hospital in Liverpool, where he's put on life support, and then he remains there. Now, eventually, the hospital is upset because the parents have smuggled in a German doctor, according to this report, in a bid to stop Alfie's life support being switched off. And I can imagine the hospital getting pretty worried about that, because this would mean, if you like, an independent medical opinion starting to have access to the child. So where does that take us? Well, it takes us to February the 20th, when Mr. Justin Hayden rules that doctors can stop providing treatment to Alfie. And this is then backed by 3 Court of Appeal judges ruling that the doctors can stop treatment. Eventually, by March the 20th, at the bottom of the screen there, a panel of 3 justices, headed by Supreme Court President Lady Hale, decide the case is, quote, not worth arguing. That's an interesting expression, isn't it, Mike? Not worth arguing. And they refuse to give the couple permission to mount a further appeal. So here's the so-called justice system now driving a wedge between parents and their child. So let's follow it through, because now we can come into the real meat of it. So April the 11th, the High Court judge endorses an end-of-life care plan for the 23-month-old boy. By April the 20th, the Supreme Court has rejected the latest legal bid. Even the European Court of Human Rights refuses to intervene. I'll just come back and say that reinforces your comments about the human rights, isn't it? Instead of it's our freedoms and God-given unalienable rights, here we're being given rights by the European system, which then takes them away. April the 24th, special session of the High Court in Manchester rejects the application to overturn the decision. And finally, April 25th, appeal judges asked to overturn the April 24th decision, but the parents' appeal is denied.
It's interesting that the Mail doesn't mention the intervention by the Pope, who had in fact, I believe, had offered to help get this child transported to Italy. But that has been rejected as well by the state. But at the heart of this, Brian, is the idea that the parents are not capable of making a decision about what's in the best interest of the child. As I heard a lot of the mainstream coverage of this on radio over the last couple of days, it's all been about, European countries don't normally sort of concern themselves with the best interests of the child. It's only in Britain that we concern ourselves with the best interests of the child. And so, in our opinion, the best interest of the child is to allow the child to die.
Yes.
That seems to be the position we're in.
Well, this is the theme, and this is where we're going to take people today. It's a very serious theme. It's very dark, but we need to discuss it. Well, let's bring in at least a couple of the judges so that we can see who we're dealing with. This is Judge Hayden. He ruled on the 20th February decision that doctors can stop treatment of Alfie. And I picked out a Telegraph headline here. Judge questions why taxpayers' money has been spent stopping British boy travelling to Syria for jihad. This is a very controversial judge. He's very big in promoting gay interests. And some people are saying at the moment that this automatically means that he may be less than, independent to the Alfie case, because they've chosen to have the support of Christian barristers. So whether there's truth in that or not, we don't know, but we can certainly say this is a very controversial judge. And he's also been working to produce documents to do with the law and how the law should be followed through. Maybe that's appropriate for a judge. But if I now bring in this lady, here she is, Lady Hale, it becomes very interesting, because if you read her CV here, it says, well, this is the first academic lawyer, law reformer that has actually come into the job of President of the Supreme Court. So what they're saying is that this isn't somebody who's been through the law system full time. This is actually a person who's been working in the background, helping to devise political policy. And I asked the question, is what's happening now the implementation of that political policy in court with respect to powers of parents over their, or in dealing with matters concerning their own children? So quite a few questions to be asked there. And at this point, let's remind people of this lady, SNP Minister Eileen also Campbell. Where did she get that strange name from? Well, she is on record as saying, with respect to the draconian SNP named person scheme, we recognise parents also have a role in making decisions about raising children. Now, UK Column reported this several times at the time she made this comment, and we said to people, do you realise what this means? What this woman is saying is that the intention is, in Scotland at least, that the state will have the principal authority for bringing up a child. But don't worry, because as a parent, you may also have a bit of a role. And now what are we seeing in this court case? Well, we're seeing in this court case that the judges in court, remember no jury, this is simply judges in court, are saying, well, you're a parent, but you can't really make sensible decisions for your own child's life, so we're going to take that decision away from you. Now, people have been creating quite a stir over the media in respect to this, and I think quite rightly. What has the result of that been? Well, Merseyside police have issued a statement. This is the statement. We issued a statement this evening to make people aware that social media posts which are being posted in relation to Alderhay and the Alfie Evans situation are being monitored and may be acted upon. Read the full statement here. So this is a threat from Merseyside police that if people are getting a bit emotional about what's been happening with Alfie, and that spills over onto social media, they are actually taking action. But this is the same police that refuse to intervene in deaths in NHS hospitals, or it's very difficult to get them to intervene. I can say from a personal basis, we were able to get Devon and Cornwall police to intervene in the death of a lady in Derriford Hospital, but my goodness, it was quite a battle to do that. And the police even told us at the time that they really had to make an appointment with the chief executive to get information, although they were dealing with a death. So this is a comment from a person this morning, and I think it was pretty astute. Perhaps we should remember that Merseyside police lied to try and cover up the Hillsborough deaths. But this is sinister stuff, Mike. We've got parents desperately worried about what's happened to their child in hospital. The police are not there in the backgrounds thinking, well, maybe a dirty deed has been done by the hospital. This is, you step out of line on social media and Merseyside police are going to be after you. So let's look at the key points around the death pathway for elderly people in this country. Food and drink are now ruled as medical treatment. In fact, that is across all age groups, so it would apply to Alfie as well. So when you see the fact that he hasn't been receiving food or drink, that is actually considered part of medical treatment. And when you see the statement, doctors have stopped medical treatment, that's food and drink as well. Removing fluids leads to dehydration, which leads to loss of cognitive function and dementia-like symptoms. That's a very important characteristic. Based on the dementia systems, drugs can then be administered, which produce further medical confusion. Cocktails of drugs, including sedatives, are used to produce a comatose state, ultimately leading to death. If family members complain at this treatment, they're barred from hospital wards and/or the Office of Public Guardian or the Court of Protection is used to take the relative from their care. Wards are often locked in this case so that visitors can't easily get in. Elderly people 80 and over can now simply be diagnosed as dying from old age. So the moment you're in hospital, you're over 80, you die, somebody can fill in a form saying, well, you died of old age. No forensic toxicology, no investigation into what actually caused the death. NHS death certificates should be completed by 2 doctors. They get £85 for each signature they make on a death certificate, but often now we see just 1 doctor signing, and often where that doctor has never seen the patient. And this is called colloquially within the NHS, sorry, I should have put that the other way around. It's cash for ash. Sorry, ash for cash, that's right, ash for cash. And coroners are fully integrated now with local authorities, the police and the NHS, so there's no separation of powers. And if you say, why would they be doing this? The answer is because it's deemed that there's too many old useless eaters who are costing the NHS and government money. This is sinister stuff, Mike.
So this is what seems to be being suggested here is that perhaps the same type of treatment is being applied to Alfie as well. And perhaps the point that we should make, although the term is no longer used anymore, of course, the original death pathway was called the Liverpool death pathway. And this is exactly the area that Alfie is living in.
Liverpool care pathway, Mike.
Yes, sorry, care pathway.
Liverpool
yes.
care pathway, yeah. Freudian slip. Well, I'm getting exactly where you are pointing. Let's just show people that what we're talking about is real. This is a BBC headline from a little while ago. Norfolk and Norwich Hospital creates A&E for elderly patients. So you go to hospital as an elderly person, you are going to be segregated through a different system. And many people say they find this very sinister. Elderly patients will be sent straight to a dedicated emergency department when they arrive at the hospital. And if there's a do not resuscitate on their records, I think we know what's going to happen. This means we've got to do something that no one else has done before in the UK to ensure our older patients are able to receive the best care, most appropriate to their needs in a timely manner. I don't get a warm feeling for this from this language. And then the article is quick to point out there's 571,245 people aged 90 or over living in the UK in 2016. And I think the implication is they're too expensive, they're costing too much money. So really, Mike, your question was this: why would children be put on a death pathway? And this is derived from information that's been coming into the UK column for some time. To destroy evidence of medical negligence, and I think this may apply in the Alfie case. To destroy evidence of vaccine damage, I think this might apply in the Alfie case. To destroy evidence of pharmaceutical drug tests, valuable body parts, and cash incentives. And if you think that's just too strong, then here we are, an article setting out hospitals bribed to put patients on the pathway to death. So the evidence is hidden in plain sight, and this is very, very serious and sinister stuff. Now, this particular image on screen is from the Twitter page of a Dr. Jones. You can see his address top left there, his Twitter address. And he's pointing out that there is a petition at the moment that children who have received at least diagnosis or treatment under the NHS but without success should be allowed to go abroad. That's already received well over 10,000 signatures. It's at 14. And basically, there's still silence from the UK government. If you want to understand this more, have a look at the UK Column website and search for Mechanics of Modern Murder, where there's an interview on this very subject. And perhaps pertinent time to remind people, May the 12th, for our Dying for Good Health conference, where we are going to be talking about all matters NHS and some wider health issues. This is not in a negative sense. This is to promote the good within the NHS, but also, of course, to delve into areas which other authorities simply refuse to report.
Right. Rotherham and the IOPC, this is the police watchdog, has produced a press release. Rotherham child sexual abuse operation continues to grow. Now, just a reminder of what I'm sure everybody knows what happened at Rotherham, but just a quick reminder. The J report, the independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation in Rotherham, which is between 1997 and 2013, had said that their conservative estimate was that 1,400 children were sexually exploited over the full inquiry period of 1997 to 2013, that they were raped by multiple perpetrators, trafficked to other towns and cities in the north of England, abducted, beaten and intimidated. There were examples of children who had been doused in petrol and threatened with being set alight, threatened with guns, made to witness brutally violent rapes, and threatened they would be next if they told anyone. Girls as young as 11 were raped by large numbers of male perpetrators. And that over the 12 years covered by the inquiry, the collective failures of political and officer leadership were blatant. The police gave no priority to child sexual exploitation. They regarded many of the child victims with contempt. They failed to act on abuse as a crime, and so on. So, but however, it's okay. The IOPC is saying that the sexual abuse operation continues to grow. What does that mean? They're saying that the number of investigations into South Yorkshire Police's response to non-recent allegations of child sexual abuse in Rotherham have grown significantly during the past year. This is Operation Linden. Our operation looking into allegations grew to 98 investigations by the beginning of April, compared to 62 investigations at the same point in 2017. 45 investigation reports have been completed and 33 current and former police officers remain under notice that they are being investigated. So that's all fine. We will see whether anything comes out of that. They say, however, that in some of the investigations where they haven't found misconduct, they've put forward interim learning recommendations.
Yeah, this is how you do the cover-up.
Absolutely.
You just say, well, we did make some mistakes. It was all in the past. We've learnt from those mistakes. We're now going to move forward and life will carry on as normal. So that's cover-up language.
Absolutely. So remind everybody to have a look at our Common Purpose Effect series by Martin Edwards, beginning with the Rotherham Common Purpose Effect article. And of course, this adds to what Brian was saying. Although it was obviously published a couple of years ago, it's still absolutely relevant. And it adds background information to what Brian was saying, I believe, on Tuesday's UK column about the similar situation in Telford. Because this is not about, nobody's denying that Asian gangs were involved in the abuse. But ultimately, the question has to be why these Asian gangs were able to act in the way that they did with impunity. And of course, this is by no means restricted to Asian gangs either. No,
it involves many other gangs, and John Wedger, former Met Detective Constable John Wedger, points this out, that whichever nationality, whichever gang is in control in a particular area of a city, those are the ones carrying out the abuse and the trafficking, the trade in the children. So this is much wider, much deeper, much more complicated than the newspapers would have us believe, where we're pretty sure that the underlying message of the press is to try and incite violence of one set of community against the others, when in fact we should be looking at who is at the top of the pile and who's controlling the system. Well, this is from a few days ago. It's quite interesting. It's Save the Children whistleblower warns it should not have taken 6 years for anyone to quit over inappropriate behaviour. This was as a result of complaints made by women in the organisation. But the chairman, Sir Alan Parker, finally resigns amid cover-up claims. That's the usual sort of press statement. Well, let's have a look at some of the report here. It says that Sir Alan intervened personally to address accusations against Brendan Cox and Justin Forsyth. A Save the Children source said that in both cases, Alan personally took control within 12 hours.
No, 48 hours.
Sorry, with 48 hours, overriding the charity's human resources rules. So that's pretty specific stuff, but it gets better. He also brought in his own lawyers to help with the cases instead of using the charity's legal advisors. So there's the wall, there's the smoke screen. And where did it go? As a result, formal investigations were abandoned and both men left discreetly. Is that not the anatomy of a cover-up? Well, this is the bit that interested me in the article. Sir Alan is founder and chairman of the PR firm Brunswick. Gordon Brown is godfather to his youngest son. And when David Cameron left Number 10, he lived briefly at Sir Alan's London home. So when senior people in the government say, we didn't know, this cannot possibly be true, whether it's this incident or whether it's the matters of wider abuse with children. Now, we reported this very briefly. This was an email sent to us where accusations were being made against the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police, of which the top one is allowing child abuse to continue. This was the gentleman. You can freeze your screen to read all of the email. I'd just like to say, as a result of our report, we've had a follow-up here, and this is what it says. Dear Brian and Mike, please be advised, following your excellent article of the 24th of April, that Cafcass have also received a memory stick with all the video and sound recordings and did absolutely nothing with it. Even worse, the Cafcass officer, after 6 months, handed the memory stick back to the barrister. The barrister already had a copy of the material and also has done nothing with it. The solicitor has a copy and has done nothing with it. It was sent to the judge, who refused to look at the video or listen to the sound recordings. A complaint went up through the judicial levels to Sir James Mumby, who also refused to look at the material. Perhaps Cafcass could be asked what their procedure is when given video and sound recordings of child abuse. Meanwhile, what is happening under Sir James Mumby and the Family Division, where video and sound recordings of child abuse are ignored by the very institution that claims its sole existence is to protect children. And just to show that that is absolutely correct, here's the Cafcass webpage. It says, "Who are we? Cafcass represents children in family court cases in England. We put children's needs, wishes and feelings first, making sure that children's voices are heard at the heart of family court setting, and that decisions are made in their best interest." This simply does not fit, Mike. There is something absolutely rotten at the heart of the child protection system. And as we've seen, when child abusers get into positions of power in that system, of course, they're going to cover up other child abuse cases.
Okay, quick ad for Media on Trial, taking place on the 27th of May in Leeds. Get along to that if you possibly can. Details at mediaontrial.uk. Now, a pretty historic events taking place tomorrow in Korea, because Kim Jong Un is going to apparently walk across the border, meet up with the South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and they're going to plant a tree together. They're going to inspect an honor guard together. They're going to walk for, I think, 20 minutes or so as they move to their final place to have their discussions. The discussions are taking place on the southern side of the border, as I say. It's going to focus on North Korea's nuclear program. But this is the first time any North Korean leader has been in the south since the end of the Korean War. When was that? 1954, I think, 53 or 54. So that's this is a pretty significant situation. And in order to celebrate that, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, said, "Until we see concrete change in North Korea's actions, we must continue to put pressure on North Korea, and so we're going to continue with the sanctions. We're not going to."
You don't want to help any move towards peaceful reconciliation at all.
No, absolutely not. Let me just move on with this. Now, this came out actually on the 16th of April. This is a report from Dapo Akandi, who is Professor of Public International Law and co-director, Oxford Institute of Ethics, Law and Armed Conflict at the University of Oxford. Completely missed it at the time. The legality of the UK's airstrikes on the Assad government in Syria. Now, this was apparently commissioned by Tom Watson, who's the deputy leader of the Labour Party. And so it says, I've been asked by Tom Watson, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, to prepare a brief opinion responding to the UK government's position on the legality under international law of military action taken against the Syrian government on the 13th, 14th of April. As set out in this opinion, the position taken by the government is significantly flawed. The military action was not taken in accordance with the United Nations Charter and international law. Now, in the body of this report, he says, and I do advise people to go and hunt it out and read it in full, but it says, however, despite the fact that the UK has advanced this legal position on a number of occasions, including in August 2013 when the government proposed to take military action in Syria, it's quite clear that the position advocated by the government is not an accurate reflection of international law as it currently stands. International law does not permit individual states to use force on the territory of other states in order to pursue humanitarian ends determined by those states. Well, why am I mentioning this? Because it was over a week ago. Well, because it piqued my interest to go and look at what media coverage there had been of this, because, as I say, it went over my head and I was wondering why I hadn't seen it at the time. So let's just have a brief look at Google News here and see who has actually covered it. Well, we've got a legal blog. The Huffington Post did mention it briefly. RT mentioned it, of course. But really not too many of the Telegraph isn't there at the top of the list. They're usually at the top of the list. Financial Times, BBC, they're not there. So it really looks like pretty much none of the what would be viewed by some people in this country as the serious mainstream press in this country have gone near this report, other than the only one is the Daily Mail, who mentioned it in the context of Corbyn's objection to the strike in the first place. But there's been no focus on this. I think it's a pretty significant report from a significant academic, and
needs to be suppressed.
Needs to be suppressed. Absolutely
dangerous to have academics speaking out, of course, as we've seen with the group speaking out on Syria in general.
Yes. Now, on I think it was Monday this week, Baroness Cox was on the Radio 4 Today programme. Now, Justin Webb's photograph there, unfortunately that was the only one I could find that was copyright free, so that's why I've used that one. But anyway, Baroness Cox was appearing on the Radio 4 Today programme, and as many people will know, the Today programme is the flagship morning news programme on the BBC. Tends to set the news agenda for the mainstream media, and she was effectively hijacked by Webb. He was asking some pretty one-sided questions. He was extremely aggressive with her. He was hardly allowing her to answer and so on. And at the heart of Webb's questioning was this report from Amnesty International, which was published on the 7th of February 2017. And the report claims that thousands of people had been put to death by hanging by the Assad government through an extrajudicial process. He claimed that this report and the accusations inside the report were what he described as firmly sourced, and He said that inside the report was the allegation that the Grand Mufti, who is the top Muslim cleric in Syria, was directly signing death warrants for these extrajudicial killings. The point here is that this report for Amnesty International was over a year old, but Justin Webb chose to ask Baroness Cox if, while she met the Grand Mufti recently, because she was in Syria up until the end of last week, with the usual group of Christian delegates that she goes with, including the Reverend Andrew Ashdown and so on. She was asked whether she had put these allegations from Amnesty International to the Grand Mufti when she met him, and if she hadn't put these to him, why not? This was the basis of his argument, but so he effectively hijacked her. Now the point is that if you look at Moon of Alabama, for just one example, they have taken this was going back to February last year, so it's been known for well over a year that there were problems with this report. And the problems that Moon of Alabama identified with the report were most of the witnesses are identified as opposition figures and former officials who do not live in Syria. Some are said to have been remotely interviewed in Syria, but it's not clear if those living in government or were living in government or insurgent-held areas. Also, the number of people Amnesty provides are in a very wide range. None are documented in lists or similar exhibits. They are solely based on hearsay and guesstimates of 2 witnesses. The report is padded up with before-after satellite pictures of enlarged graveyards in Syria. It claims that these expansions are a sign of mass graves of government opponents, but there's zero evidence for that in the report. Many people have died in Syria throughout the war on all sides of the conflict. The report, they say, talks of extrajudicial executions, but then describes military court procedures and a necessary higher approval of the judgment. One may not like the laws that govern the Syrian state, they say, but the courts and the procedures Amnesty described seem to follow the Syrian laws and legal processes. They are thereby, by definition, not extrajudicial. The other concern that they have is that the executive summary in the Amnesty report says that death sentences are approved by the Grand Mufti of Syria, but there's no evidence provided of approval by the Grand Mufti in the details of the report. On page 19, it claims based on 2 former prison and court officials. So it's a bit vague on this, but there's no evidence provided. The judgment is sent by military post, according to these 2 officials, to the Grand Mufti in Syria and to either the Minister of Defence or the Chief of Staff of the Army, who are deputised to sign for the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who specify the date of the execution. And then Moon of Alabama makes the point it's very doubtful that the Syrian government would deputise or even inform the Grand Mufti in cases of military or criminal legal proceedings. Amnesty International may dislike the fact, but Syria is a secular state. The Grand Mufti in Syria is a civil legal authority for some followers of the Sunni Muslim religion, but he has no official judiciary role. So a number of concerns raised over the report that Justin Webb was basing his attack on Baroness Cox on, but he was quite definitive that it's extremely well sourced, and when in fact it isn't. So Baroness Cox has now written to the BBC, making an official complaint about this. She says, I write with reference to my most recent appearance on the Today programme 23rd of April, during which Justin Webb persisted with questions asking why I met with the Grand Mufti in Syria. Mr. Webb cited a supposed very firmly sourced Amnesty International report which alleged the Grand Mufti had personally authorised hundreds of executions following trials in military courts. He referred to the Grand Mufti as a mass murderer and very strongly implied that by meeting with him, I condone these heinous crimes. The overriding focus on the subject and Mr. Webb's repeated speaking over prevented me from speaking adequately about the purposes and findings of my visit to Syria. I'm profoundly concerned with Mr. Webb's allegations were based on false information. First, I've never condoned the violations of human rights in Syria or elsewhere. Second, I've been advised by a former British ambassador to Syria that the allegations within the Amnesty report are untrue. In secular Syria, the religious authorities have no role in the rulings of state courts. Mr. Webb failed to mention that Amnesty's claims about the Grand Mufti are hotly contested. His aggressive questioning appears to be based on poor research and by consequence has caused serious harm to my reputation. I'm therefore writing to make a formal complaint. This letter has had absolutely no coverage whatsoever in the mainstream press. I can't think why.
No, what also interests me is that she's got the power to go straight to the man at the top, and yet for members of, I'm not criticising her for what she's done, she's got the ability to do it, but for ordinary people, you go into the BBC complaint system, which is designed to drag you down, delay, obfuscation. At least she's been able to get her complaint straight through to Tony Hall himself, and it'd be interesting to see, if we ever do see, what his reply to her is.
Of course, we don't know whether Tony Hall will actually see it, because any time that we've written in that direction...
Could it be Capita who's going to see it?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Yes. In the meantime, a number of news outlets reporting. I think this report originated with the Guardian, and I believe it's unsourced, but anyway, or at least certainly sources aren't cited, but a number of mainstream media outlets have picked this up, saying that Western nations are seeking to bypass the veto by Russia in the UN Security Council. And Russia, of course, is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has the power of veto. And so how are they going about this? Well, what it seems like is that they are using a rarely used route, which enables 9 members of the Security Council, 9 out of the 15, to bypass the veto and refer matters to the full vote of the General Assembly, which would then require a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly for the vote to be approved. This, Brian, to me, seems like a pretty dangerous precedent if they could manage to get 2/3 of a vote in the General Assembly, because the point of the Security Council is to consider things like taking military action against nation states. This is something which up until now has been considered to be within the remit of the Security Council alone and not for the General Assembly.
Yeah.
So it seems like a pretty cynical subversion of the sort of rules that are based on...
Well, if the organisation's not making the decisions they want, which is obviously for war in the Middle East and regime change in Syria, they're going to go flat out to cause trouble inside the UN itself. This is standard procedure. Well, let's just bring this one on screen, again from a couple of days ago. It's the Telegraph reporting that the US has awarded a $1 billion contract for hypersonic missiles. This is to Lockheed Martin, quote, as America falls behind Russia and China in the new arms race. This is very interesting, isn't it, this title, because it's quite clear the US has fallen behind. But if you listen to some of the dialogue from President Putin talking, he explains why Russia started to develop the new weapons. And he specifically says, we kept saying to the Americans that if you persist with these missile defense systems, which neutralize our nuclear delivery systems, we're going to have to take new measures. And he says the Americans simply refuse to communicate. So now we've got panic in the Americans. If we just bring the article in here, $1 billion magicked up going to Lockheed Martin. But of course, the American officials have also expressed concern that China was building missiles that could outrace or outfox its existing defense and interceptor systems. So once again, when it comes to the military, in America at least, money is just not a problem. You conjure up whatever you need.
Okay, we'll end with a quick reminder of Alternative View 9, 4th to the 7th of May 2018, Horwood House Hotel near Milton Keynes. Some day tickets still available for that. And hope to see you there. You will be speaking?
I will be speaking. I think it's going to be very interesting, a very interesting AV9. We'll just end by saying thank you very much to all the UK Column supporters. If you are not a subscriber and you are enjoying and benefiting from UK Column news, and if you're learning from our analysis, then we say please subscribe, because we need that financial support, not only to do what we're doing, but also to expand what we're doing. So if you're not a subscriber, please get online and subscribe. Of course, if you're happy to make a donation, that is greatly appreciated. But we can see in these troubled times that independent media is just so important for taking the lid off what's really happening. So support the UK column, and please spread these broadcasts, point people at our news editions, and also retweet the tweets if you can do it. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.